At exactly 4:12 a.m., something happened that had never been recorded before. A system made a decision, before the pattern appeared. And 7 minutes later, the pattern did something it had never done in 250 years. It moved. Not gradually. Not naturally. But as if it had been interrupted. And then, it disappeared. No alarms were triggered. No systems failed. No headlines were written. But in that moment, something changed. Something that had always followed the same quiet rules, no longer did. The building did not look important. From the outside, it was just another glass tower along the Hudson River. Corporate. Clean. Unremarkable. The kind of place people walked past without ever wondering what happened inside. No signage. No name on the entrance. No indication that anything unusual existed beyond its reflective surface. But 3 floors below street level, behind secured elevators and doors that required 2 separate access codes, there was a room that did not belong to any public system. No government oversight. No regulatory connection. No external network. It was designed that way intentionally. Isolated. Contained. Invisible. Inside, the lights never turned off. Because the system never stopped watching. The room was circular. Walls curved inward slightly, lined with seamless displays that wrapped around the entire perimeter. Not separate screens. One continuous surface of data. Alive. Moving. Breathing. Railway timing grids flowed across one section. Weather pressure systems shifted across another. Shipping routes, traffic density, energy load curves, aviation corridors, layered together into a single dynamic model of how the world moved. Not visually. Structurally. Everything connected. Everything influencing everything else. And at the center of that room stood Daniel Kessler. Daniel did not look like someone who would change the rules of a system that had existed for centuries. He did not look like someone who would interfere with something he did not fully understand. He looked like someone who solved problems. Precise. Measured. Controlled. The kind of person who did not believe in coincidence because he had never needed to. For the past 11 months, Daniel had been studying anomalies. Not large events. Not disasters. The opposite. Moments when something should have gone wrong, and did not. A storm that weakened unexpectedly. A rail delay that resolved itself without intervention. A traffic surge that dissipated without explanation. At first, the anomalies were dismissed. Statistical noise. Outliers. Irrelevant data. But Daniel did not ignore patterns. He looked closer. Then closer again. And what he found did not belong to any model. The pattern did not behave like weather. It did not behave like infrastructure. It did not behave like probability. It behaved like something else. Something that responded. Not to force. Not to physics. But to decisions. Small ones. Human ones. Often invisible. The first time he noticed it clearly, he thought it was coincidence. The second time, he thought it was correlation. The third time, he stopped using those words. Because the pattern was repeating. Not identically. But consistently. It shifted. Adjusted. Bended. As if something inside the system was reacting to choices being made. And now. For the first time. His system was predicting where that reaction would happen next. Run projection again. The technician did not question him. He had stopped questioning him weeks ago. The system recalculated. Millions of variables adjusting simultaneously. Timing sequences. Pressure gradients. Decision pathways. Every movement across multiple infrastructures feeding into the same model. And then, the structure appeared. Not immediately. At first, it looked like overlapping curves. Clusters of pressure forming across different systems. Rail timing compressing. Energy demand rising. Weather gradients shifting. Nothing unusual on their own. But when layered together, they formed something unmistakable. A spiral. Daniel stepped closer. The display reflected faintly in his eyes. There it was. Not drawn. Not imagined. Not interpreted. Generated. A convergence of pressure. Not at a place. At a moment. A point in time where multiple systems would reach alignment. Where something would normally happen. Something that had always happened the same way. Unless someone changed it. How long? The technician checked the output again. 17 minutes. 17 minutes until convergence. 17 minutes until the pattern completed. 17 minutes until the world corrected itself the way it always had. Daniel nodded slowly. Then asked the question no one in the room expected. Can we change it? Silence. Not confusion. Understanding. Because everyone in that room knew what that meant. The system had never been used to interfere. It observed. It modeled. It predicted. But it did not act. One of the analysts spoke carefully. You mean, intervene? Daniel shook his head slightly. I mean influence the outcome. Another pause. We don't know what happens if we do that. Daniel nodded. That's why we do it early. He pointed toward the spiral. Before it stabilizes. The technician hesitated. What adjustment? Daniel did not hesitate. Secondary freight line. He zoomed into the model. A rail junction. Multiple lines intersecting. Timing windows narrowing. Pressure building. Shift departure by 4 minutes. The analyst frowned. That breaks optimization. Daniel turned to him for the first time. Optimization assumes stability. He turned back to the screen. This is pressure. The command was entered. A small change. 4 minutes. In a system handling thousands of movements per hour, it meant nothing. No alerts. No flags. No external awareness. But inside the model, everything shifted. The projection updated. The spiral responded. It loosened. Not dramatically. Just enough to register. The technician exhaled. It worked. Daniel did not respond. Because he was watching something else. Something that did not follow the model. The spiral did not dissolve. It moved. Not along the rail line. Not within the corridor. Somewhere else. A new center began forming. Faster than before. More tightly. As if the pressure had been pushed, not removed. The technician leaned forward. That's not supposed to happen. Daniel raised a hand. Wait. The system recalculated again. Pressure redistributed across adjacent systems. Energy demand shifted. Weather gradients adjusted. Traffic flow altered slightly. Everything responded. Not randomly. Not chaotically. But precisely. The spiral tightened again. Stronger. More aggressive. Then, it vanished. The screen flattened. No structure. No convergence. Just normal system flow. The room fell silent. The technician spoke first. Did we stop it? No one answered. Because no one knew. Daniel stared at the blank projection. His voice was quiet. We didn't stop it. A pause. Then, we forced it to move. He zoomed out. Looking for traces. Residual pressure. Anything. There was nothing. No pattern. No continuation. No explanation. For the first time since he began studying the anomalies, Daniel felt something he had not expected. Not confusion. Not uncertainty. Something else. Recognition. The pattern had not behaved differently by accident. It had reacted. And if it could react, then it could adapt. Daniel stepped back from the display. His voice was lower now. Almost to himself. It noticed. At 4:32 a.m., Daniel Kessler did something he had never needed to do before. He stopped trusting his own system. For 11 months, the model had been precise. Not perfect. But consistent. It identified pressure patterns earlier than any existing system. It predicted convergence points before they formed. It revealed structure where others saw noise. That was why it existed. That was why this room existed. But now, something did not fit. Daniel replayed the sequence again. The same moment. The same adjustment. The same result. 4-minute shift. Spiral loosens. Pressure redistributes. New convergence begins forming. Then, nothing. No continuation. No residual pattern. No trace. That was the problem. The spiral had never simply disappeared before. Not in any dataset. Not in any anomaly record. Not in any reconstructed model. It always completed. It always resolved. It always left something behind. But this time, it was as if the pattern had been interrupted mid-motion. Daniel zoomed in further. Looking for error. Looking for drift. Looking for anything that would explain the gap. There. A delay. Not in the system. In the model itself. A fraction of a second. So small it should not have mattered. But it did. The system had lost track of the pattern for just long enough to miss where it went next. Daniel straightened slightly. Run external correlation. The technician hesitated. That pulls an external system noise. Daniel did not look away from the screen. Run it. The system expanded its scope. Pulling in global data. Not controlled. Not filtered. Raw. Shipping. Rail. Energy. Weather. Traffic. Everything. The data flooded in. Messy. Unstructured. Unpredictable. And then, patterns began to align. Not one. Several. Small deviations. Early adjustments. Minor shifts. All within the same time window. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. That's not random. The technician leaned closer. What are we looking at? Daniel did not answer immediately. Because the implication was forming too quickly. These adjustments, he paused. They weren't triggered by our system. Silence. Because that should not have been possible. This room was isolated. The system was closed. No external input. No external output. Nothing outside this space should have known. And yet, something had moved. Daniel spoke slowly. Trace origin points. The system attempted it. Routing backward through network pathways. Looking for command sources. Result, no origin found. The technician frowned. That's not possible. Daniel nodded. I know. Because systems always had origins. Commands came from somewhere. Adjustments had sources. Except this time. They didn't. Daniel stepped back slightly. Looking at the full display. All the systems. All the shifts. All the deviations. Then he saw it. Not in the data. In the timing. The adjustments had not been simultaneous. But they had not been sequential either. They were aware. Not coordinated by command. But connected by recognition. Daniel spoke quietly. That's not a system. The technician looked at him. Then what is it? Daniel's answer came slower. Because it was not something he had expected to say. That's observers. Silence. Because that was worse. A system could be mapped. Controlled. Adjusted. People. Could not. Daniel turned back to the display. Isolate clusters. The system grouped the signals. Patterns within patterns. Shipping. Rail. Energy. Weather. Different systems. Different locations. Different operators. But the same behavior. Early recognition. Early adjustment. Daniel exhaled slowly. They saw it. The technician frowned. Before us? Daniel shook his head slightly. No, he pointed to the timeline. They saw what we disrupted. That changed everything. Because it meant something else had happened. When Daniel interfered with the spiral, he had not stopped it. He had moved it. And when it moved, someone else had noticed. Not the pattern. The shift. Daniel's voice dropped. They're not predicting it. Pause. They're following it. The technician stepped back slightly. Who? Daniel did not answer. Because the system did not know. But something else did. The message. He opened the log. Scrolling through incoming data. Until he found it. A single line. You are not the only ones watching. The technician leaned in. Where did that come from? No routing data. No origin. No trace. Silence. Daniel read the line again. Then again. It was not aggressive. Not threatening. It was precise. A statement. And statements were different. Statements implied confidence. And confidence implied understanding. Daniel spoke slowly. They know what we're doing. The technician's voice dropped. How? Daniel looked back at the screen. At the data. At the shifts. At the pattern that had disappeared. They saw the same thing we did. Pause. And they didn't try to control it. That was the difference. Daniel had acted. They had watched. And somehow, that made them more dangerous. He stepped closer to the display. Zooming out. Looking at the full system again. For the first time. It did not feel like he was observing the world. It felt like the world was observing back. Daniel's voice was quiet. Find them. The technician hesitated. We don't have enough data. Daniel nodded. Then we create it. Silence. Because that meant something new. Not observation. Not prediction. Interaction. The technician swallowed. What are you suggesting? Daniel did not look away from the screen. We do it again. Pause. But bigger. The room went still. Because this time. It would not be a test. It would be a signal. And somewhere, far from that room. The silent network had already begun to respond. No one in the room responded. Because no one understood what he meant. Not yet. But somewhere, far from that room. Someone else had already begun to feel it. At 4:19 a.m., something shifted inside the silent network. No alert triggered it. No system flagged it. No message arrived announcing that anything had changed. But across different parts of the world, in places that had learned how to listen, the same quiet signal appeared. Not visible. Not measurable. But recognizable. In Pine Ridge, Eleanor Hayes stopped writing mid-sentence. The pen hovered just above the page. She did not move for several seconds. Then slowly, she set it down. Across the room, Michael Carter turned away from the window. You felt that? It was not a question. Eleanor nodded. Yes. For weeks, since the network had stabilized after the last spiral event, moments like this had become familiar. Subtle. Quiet. A shift in pressure before it became visible. The kind of moment that could not be explained to anyone who had not experienced it before. But this felt different. Not stronger. Not clearer. Just, wrong. Eleanor walked toward the spiral board. The map had changed since Season 2. No longer filled with tight curves and convergence points, it now displayed something more distributed. Recognition signals. Early adjustments. A structure that did not collapse inward anymore. The world had learned how to see earlier. And because of that, the spiral had stopped behaving the way it once had. But now, Eleanor reached for a piece of chalk. Paused. Then drew a small mark on the board. A single point. Not where the spiral would form. Where something had shifted. Michael watched her. What is it? Eleanor shook her head slightly. I don't know yet. She stepped back. But something moved before it should have. The archive computer chimed. A message. Michael moved quickly. He opened it. Kansas City. Freight dispatch. Minor timing deviation. No incident. No issue. No explanation. Michael frowned. That's early. Eleanor walked over. How early? He pointed to the timestamp. Too early. Because the silent network did not act blindly. It did not adjust systems without recognition. It did not move without seeing pressure first. That had been the lesson of Season 2. Recognition came first. Then action. Always. But this was action without recognition. Eleanor's voice dropped slightly. That's not us. Michael nodded. No, another message appeared. Osaka. Rail sequence adjustment. Minor deviation. Again, no incident. No reason. Then another. Rotterdam. Shipping delay. 3 minutes. Unexplained. Eleanor felt something settle into place. Not understanding. Recognition. She stepped back toward the board. More points appeared. Not connected. Not forming a curve. But aligned in time. Michael spoke slowly. Those are not random. Eleanor shook her head. No, she turned toward him. They're too early. Silence. Then Michael said something neither of them had considered before. What if someone else saw it first? Eleanor did not answer immediately. Because that possibility had never existed before. The silent network was not built. It had emerged. Slowly. Across systems. Across people. Across time. No one owned it. No one controlled it. It was recognition. Shared. And now. Someone had acted before recognition reached the network. The phone rang. Michael answered. Pine Ridge Archive. Melissa Grant. Kansas City. Her voice was calm. But different. Did you see the adjustment? Michael glanced at Eleanor. Yes. Pause. Then, we didn't do that. Eleanor stepped closer. You're sure? Melissa answered immediately. Completely. Michael frowned. Then who did? Another pause. Longer this time. That's what I was calling to ask. The line went quiet. Then Melissa added something that shifted everything. It happened before the system flagged anything. Eleanor felt the words settle into place. Before the system. Before recognition. Before the moment. Michael spoke slowly. That's not possible. Melissa exhaled quietly. No. The call ended. The archive fell silent. But not the kind of silence they were used to. This was something else. A space where understanding had not caught up yet. Eleanor turned back to the board. More points appeared. More early adjustments. More small decisions. Across different systems. Different locations. Different people. But all within the same narrow window of time. Michael crossed his arms. That's not coincidence. Eleanor nodded. No, because they had already learned what coincidence looked like. And this wasn't it. This was intentional. She stepped closer to the board. Tracing the points with her eyes. Looking for structure. Looking for shape. Looking for something familiar. And then she saw it. Not a spiral. Not yet. But something forming. A pattern that had been interrupted. Before it could complete. Her voice was quiet. They didn't stop it. Michael looked at her. What? They moved it. Silence. Because that changed everything. For centuries, the spiral had followed pressure. Then it had followed recognition. But now, someone had interfered before either. Michael spoke carefully. If someone can act before the pattern, Eleanor finished the thought. They can change where it forms. Another pause. Then, they can control it. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Unfamiliar. Dangerous. Michael shook his head slowly. No, Eleanor looked at him. You don't think so? Michael stepped closer to the board. Looking at the points again. Then back at her. I think they believe they can. That was worse. Because belief did not require understanding. The archived computer chimed again. A new message. Unknown source. No routing data. No origin. Michael hesitated. Then opened it. A single line. You are not the only ones watching. The room went still. Eleanor read it again. Slowly. Then again. No signature. No identifier. No trace. Just a statement. Michael exhaled quietly. That's not a warning. Eleanor shook her head. No, it's a message. Silence. Because for the first time since the silent network began, they were no longer alone. And somewhere, in a room without windows, someone was already watching them back. That night, Pine Ridge looked exactly the same. The courthouse lights dimmed at the same hour. The streets emptied the same way they always did. Wind moved through the trees with the same quiet rhythm that had never once asked to be noticed. Nothing had changed. That was what made it dangerous. Because the most significant shifts do not arrive with noise. They do not announce themselves. They do not interrupt the surface of things. They move underneath. And by the time they become visible, they are already part of the system. Eleanor Hayes stood alone in front of the spiral board, studying something that did not yet exist. That was the first sign something had gone wrong. For 2 centuries, the archive had documented what had already happened. Storms that changed direction. Systems that adjusted unexpectedly. Moments when pressure reached a point and something shifted in response. The pattern had always revealed itself after convergence. Never before. But tonight, Eleanor was not looking at convergence. She was looking at fragments. Points that had moved too early. Signals that had arrived before anything had formed. She lifted the chalk slowly and placed another mark on the board. Then another. Then another. They did not connect. They did not curve. They did not suggest a structure. And yet, she could feel it. Not see it. Not measure it. But recognize it. Something was trying to form. And something else had interrupted it before it could. Behind her, Michael Carter leaned against the edge of the archive table, arms crossed, watching in silence. For most of his life, he had trusted systems that behaved consistently. Altitude readings followed physics. Radar followed signal. Flight paths followed procedure. Even uncertainty had limits. But nothing about what he was looking at now followed any system he had ever known. "You're mapping something that isn't there," he said. Eleanor did not turn. "Yes." Michael let out a slow breath. "That's not how this works." She paused. Then answered in a way that felt heavier than anything she had said all day. "It used to be." The word stayed in the room. Not dramatic. Not loud. But undeniable. The archive computer chimed softly. Another signal. Michael stepped forward and checked the screen. Madrid. Energy redistribution. 1.7%. No request. No trigger. No explanation. He frowned. "That's 5. Eleanor wrote it down. Each new point tightening something invisible in her mind. "They're getting more precise," she said. Michael shook his head slightly. "Or more confident." The distinction settled between them. Precision came from understanding. Confidence came from belief. And belief, without understanding, was the beginning of mistakes. The door opened. No knock. No sound. No visible motion leading up to it. Just presence. Michael turned immediately. Eleanor did not. She had already felt it. The same way she had felt the shift earlier that morning. The same way she had felt the pattern move before it formed. The stranger stood in the doorway. Unchanged. Unhurried. Uncertain only in the way that made him impossible to measure. For the first time since the network had formed, his presence did not feel like reassurance. It felt like confirmation. Michael spoke first. "They're acting early." The stranger nodded. "Yes." Eleanor turned slowly, her expression steady but sharpened. "They're moving the pattern." The stranger stepped into the room. "No," a brief pause. "They're displacing it." The word changed everything. Michael frowned. "What does that mean?" The stranger walked toward the board, his gaze moving across the scattered points. "Control assumes direction," he said quietly. "Displacement removes stability." Eleanor looked back at the marks she had drawn. "They're pushing pressure somewhere else." "Yes. And they don't know where it's going." The stranger did not respond. He did not need to. Because that was the part that mattered. Michael stepped closer. "They think they can improve the outcome." The stranger's expression remained calm. "They believe the outcome is something that can be improved." Michael shook his head. "That's not how this works." "No," the stranger said. "But it is how systems are built." The sentence landed with weight. Because it was true. Every system Michael had ever trusted was designed to optimize. Reduce delay. Minimize risk. Increase efficiency. Predict outcomes. But the spiral had never followed those rules. It did not optimize. It balanced. Eleanor felt something shift in her understanding. "They're not removing pressure, she said slowly. They're redistributing it. Yes. And they don't understand the cost. The stranger looked at her. Not yet. Silence filled the archive. Outside, the wind shifted again. Subtle. Barely noticeable. But different. Eleanor felt it. Not as sound. As structure. Something was building. Not along the same path. Not toward the same convergence. But building nonetheless. Michael spoke carefully. If they keep doing this, Eleanor finished the thought. They'll change how everything behaves. The stranger nodded. Yes. A pause. And not in a way they can predict. Michael turned toward him. This has happened before. The stranger met his gaze. Yes. When? The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the board again. The scattered points. The incomplete structure. The early signals. Then he spoke. Not here. A pause. Not in this time. Eleanor stepped closer. What happened? The stranger's voice lowered slightly. They believed they could reduce the cost of the outcome. Michael frowned. What cost? The stranger looked at him. The cost that makes the outcome necessary. The room went quiet again. Because the sentence did not fully make sense. But it felt true. Eleanor tried to follow it. You're saying the outcome exists because of the pressure. Yes. And if you interfere with that, you change where the pressure goes. Michael exhaled slowly. And then what? The stranger's answer came without hesitation. The system compensates. Eleanor turned back to the board. Looking at the scattered points again. They're not stopping anything. No, they're making it harder to see. Yes. And that was the danger. Because if the pattern could no longer be seen clearly, then recognition would arrive later. And when recognition arrives late, the outcome changes. Michael stepped closer to the board. We need to track it faster. The stranger shook his head. You cannot chase something you helped destabilize. Michael frowned. We didn't do this. No, the stranger said. But they did. And now the system was different. Not broken. Not yet. But changed. Eleanor felt it clearly now. For the first time since the journals had arrived, the spiral was no longer something they could follow with certainty. It was something they had to rediscover. Michael spoke quietly. What do we do? The question was simple. But the answer was not. The stranger looked at him. For centuries, the spiral revealed where recognition arrived too late. Eleanor listened carefully. And now? Now recognition is no longer the only force shaping the outcome. The word settled heavily. Because that meant something else had entered the system. Not naturally. Intentionally. Michael said softly, then we move earlier. The stranger shook his head. Earlier is not the same as understanding. Silence. Then Eleanor asked the only question that mattered. Can it be controlled? The stranger did not answer immediately. He looked at the board. At the scattered points. At the incomplete structure. At the early signals. Then he said quietly, no, a pause. It can be influenced. Eleanor wrote that down. Word for word. Because she knew it would matter later. Michael exhaled slowly. That's worse. The stranger nodded. Yes. Because influence without understanding is how systems begin to fail. The stranger stepped toward the door. Michael watched him. You're not going to stop them. No, why not? Because they have already begun. The door opened. The night remained unchanged. But the system had not. And for the first time since the spiral had been recorded, Eleanor understood something she had not wanted to accept. The world was no longer just responding to pressure. It was interfering with it. And that meant the next pattern would not behave the same way. At 4:57 a.m., Daniel Kessler made the second decision. This time, he did not wait for agreement. He did not ask for validation. And he did not consider whether the system should be influenced. He only considered how far it could be pushed before it revealed something new. That was the shift. The first intervention had been a question. The second was an intention. And intention changes everything. The room felt different now. Not uncertain. Not cautious. The hesitation that had filled the space earlier had been replaced by something more dangerous. Clarity. Daniel stood in front of the curved display wall, watching the system rebuild the pattern faster than before. The model no longer moved slowly. It anticipated. It filled gaps before they appeared. It projected convergence earlier than it had only minutes ago. The technician noticed it first. "It's accelerating," he said quietly. Daniel nodded. "I know. Because once a system is influenced, it does not return to its original state. It adjusts. It compensates. It learns." And the spiral had just been influenced for the first time in a way it had never experienced before. The display shifted. Pressure curves formed ahead of schedule. Rail timing compressed earlier. Energy demand spiked slightly before it should have. Weather gradients tightened faster than expected. The pattern was not waiting anymore. It was arriving. "How long?" Daniel asked. 12 minutes, the technician replied. "Shorter than before. More compressed. Less stable." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Good." The word did not comfort anyone else in the room. Because shorter convergence did not mean better control. It meant less time to understand what was happening. Daniel zoomed into the model. The convergence point was forming across multiple systems now. Rail lines intersecting near a central corridor. Energy redistribution aligning with the same time window. Traffic density adjusting in response. Everything feeding into a single moment. A single alignment. A single decision point. But this time, Daniel was not going to wait for it to form. "Adjust two systems," he said. The technician hesitated. "Which ones?" Daniel did not pause. "Rail and energy." The analyst stepped forward. "That will create cross-system pressure." Daniel nodded. "Yes. That's the point. Because one adjustment influenced the pattern. Two adjustments would shape it. Or at least, that was the assumption." The command was entered. A 3-minute shift in freight departure timing. A 2% redistribution in energy load. Individually insignificant. Together, a structural change. The system responded instantly. The spiral appeared. Tighter. More defined. More immediate. Then it reacted. Not gradually. Not in a way that followed any previous model. It tightened further. Then expanded outward. Then, it split. The room went completely still. Two centers formed. Not connected. Not sequential. Simultaneous. Independent. The technician leaned closer to the screen. "That's not a variation," he said. "That's a change." Daniel did not respond. Because he was already seeing what that meant. The spiral was no longer a single structure. It had become multiple potential outcomes. "Track both," Daniel said. The system attempted to follow both convergence points. One held. Stable. Predictable. The other, collapsed. Not vanished. Collapsed. As if the pressure had been forced into a structure that could not sustain it. The analyst spoke under his breath. That shouldn't be possible. Daniel nodded slowly. No, but it had happened. And that meant the model was no longer describing the system accurately. The system had changed. Daniel leaned closer. Recalculate propagation. The system processed the data. The result appeared almost immediately. Faster than expected. Much faster. The remaining spiral was no longer contained. It was expanding. Not across one system. Across several. Rail adjustments triggered energy responses. Energy responses triggered traffic shifts. Traffic shifts influenced timing elsewhere. The pattern was no longer local. It was systemic. It's spreading, the technician said. Daniel watched the propagation carefully. Not chaotic. Not random. Structured. But different. The spiral was no longer tightening toward a single point. It was branching. The display updated again. The structure shifted. Not into a curve. Not into a spiral. Into something wider. Something less defined. Something harder to track. Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not fear. Not doubt. Recognition. He spoke quietly. We changed the way it forms. No one answered. Because the evidence was already on the screen. The pattern was no longer behaving the way it had before. It was adapting to interference. The system recalculated again. Trying to predict the new structure. Trying to stabilize the model. But every time it approached a solution, the pattern shifted again. Not randomly. But responsively. As if it was adjusting faster than the model could follow. The technician stepped back. We're losing it. Daniel did not move. No, he said quietly. We never had it. That was the truth. The model had never captured the spiral. It had only followed it. And now. The spiral was no longer following the same path. A new alert appeared. External data feed. Unfiltered. Unrequested. Daniel turned toward the secondary display. Signals. Multiple. From different systems. Different locations. Different operators. All within the same narrow window of time. Early adjustments. Before convergence. Before measurable pressure. Before the model could even predict them. Daniel's eyes narrowed. There again. The technician looked at the screen. Who? Daniel did not answer immediately. Because this time, the answer was clearer. The observers. Not a system. Not a program. People. Watching. Recognizing. Acting. But not in the same way Daniel was. They were not trying to control the pattern. They were responding to it. And that made them more aligned with it. Daniel stepped closer. They saw the shift. The technician frowned. How? Daniel shook his head slightly. They didn't see what we did. Pause. They saw what it became. That was the difference. Daniel had acted on prediction. They were acting on recognition. And now the two were colliding. The screen updated again. The spreading structure tightened briefly. Then, vanished. Again. The room fell silent. No spiral. No convergence. No structure. Just normal system flow. The technician spoke carefully. Did we stop it? Daniel did not answer. Because he understood something now that he had not understood before. Stopping the visible pattern did not mean stopping the system. It meant losing visibility. He looked at the empty display. Then at the external signals. Then back at the system. We didn't stop it, he said quietly. We forced it out of our model. Silence. Because that was worse. A system that can be seen can be understood. A system that disappears cannot. Daniel stepped back slowly. For the first time since he began tracking the anomalies, he was not ahead of the pattern. He was inside it. And inside a system, there is no control. Only participation. He spoke again, more quietly now. We're not directing anything. Pause. We're part of the outcome. Across the world, the silent network continued to respond. Not aggressively. Not blindly. But carefully. Adjustments made with recognition. Not assumption. Eleanor Hayes closed her notebook slowly. Michael Carter stood beside her. Neither of them spoke immediately. Because they both felt it. The same shift. The same change. The same loss of clarity. Finally, Eleanor said softly, "They're pushing it too far." Michael nodded. And it's pushing back. That was the part no one in the room with Daniel understood yet. The spiral did not resist. It responded. But response, under pressure, changes form. And now the form was changing. Eleanor looked at the board again. The scattered points. The incomplete structure. The absence of a clear pattern. It's not going to behave the same way anymore, she said. Michael asked quietly, then how do we recognize it? Eleanor did not answer right away. Because the answer had not fully formed. Then she said, we learn again. Because that was what this had always been. Not control. Not prediction. Recognition. And recognition had to evolve. Just like the system had. Somewhere far from Pine Ridge, Daniel stood in front of a system he no longer fully understood. And for the first time, he did not feel like he was observing the pattern. He felt like the pattern was observing him. The model refreshed again. Empty. Stable. Normal. But he knew better now. Nothing about it was normal anymore. He spoke one final sentence before leaving the room. Run it again. Because the second mistake had already been made. And the third would not be far behind. In forgotten places, where pressure moves before it is seen, where systems change before they are understood, justice does not shout. It whispers. And every act leaves an echo. You have been listening to Whispers of Reckoning. The first time someone tried to control the pattern, they believed they could improve the outcome. The second time, they believed they understood it. The next time, the pattern may not give them the chance to learn the difference.